I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics. Messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for September the 12th, 2025. We come to an end of what has been a very dramatic week, whether it was Israel attacking Hamas headquarters in Qatar, Russian drones entering into Poland, or the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk. And indeed, many of us are still sorting through these matters as they have yet to conclude. So as we approach the fall high holidays, there are many things for us to be contemplating, praying about, entreating the Lord about regarding our future. And we are steadfastly reminded, number one, pray for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. Number two, pray for peace, Russia, Ukraine. And number three, pray for sanity here on the American home front. All right, so we have a very important teaching today. It is, of course, Friday. We are getting ready to go into Shabbat, and hopefully we will all be able to take a short rest from a lot of these different matters which plague the world and cause us to be anxious, whatever the case might be. Many of you all know right now, one of my ongoing projects is to update our ministry's Messianic Sabbath Helper publication, kind of give it a refresh. It was released about 10 years ago. Give it a little update here and there regarding some of the developments which have taken place in the Messianic community and with our own ministry and family. So one of the important entries, and this is taken from the updated edition, which is yet to be released. This is taken from that file, looking at a release sometime, I'm shooting for early November. I am on the second read through with this. Exodus 16:22-30, gathering manna before the Sabbath. So we are in a time right now, which is, of course, before the Sabbath. If we were in ancient Israel in the wilderness, we would be gathering up manna for Shabbat, for the first day of the week, of course. And one of the questions about gathering manna for the Sabbath, with all these different matters in view, is how this passage appears before ancient Israel was given the Decalogue and the fourth commandment. So what does this speak to the institution of the Sabbath? Was the institution of the Sabbath something which in some form was observed by different, let's call them people of God, before the community of ancient Israel came on the scene? This is something that examiners have definitely had to probe. All right, so gathering manna before the Sabbath. Exodus 16:22-30, and this is from what I have labeled the Messianic Apologetics Revised Version. Many of you are familiar with the World Messianic Bible, formerly the Hebrew Names Version. It's in the public domain, so I've taken this and modified it a little bit. That's why it's Messianic Apologetics Revised Version. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers, 4 quarts, Holman Christian Standard Bible, for each one, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. He said to them, "This is that which Adonai has spoken. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath, a Shabbat rest, a holy Shabbat, Tree of Life version, to Adonai. Bake that which you want to bake, and boil that which you want to boil, and all that remains over lay up for yourselves to be kept until the morning. They laid it up until the morning as Moses ordered. And it did not become foul, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath, Shabbat, to Adonai. Today you shall not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath, Shabbat. In it there shall be none. On the seventh day some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. Adonai said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? See, because Adonai has given you the Sabbath, Shabbat, therefore he gives you on the sixth day the bread of 2 days. Every man stay in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. Exodus 16, 22 to 30. So let's go into our analysis of this passage. The first explicit mention of the seventh-day Sabbath, or Shabbat, in the Torah appears in conjunction with the giving of the manna to the ancient Israelites, Exodus 16, 11 through 15, and the specific instructions involving the collection of the manna as the intended daily food for the population, Exodus 16, 16 through 19. Moses directed how the Israelites were permitted to take one omer per person, per each tent in the camp. Exodus 16, 16. The people had enough provision for the day, Exodus 16, 18, until they could collect the manna again the following morning, Exodus 16, 19. Not all observed what Moses had said, as the old manna from the previous day would have worms and be foul, Exodus 16, 20, when it would be time to replenish the supply. It is noted how manna was to be collected morning by morning, everyone according to his eating. When the sun grew hot, it melted. Exodus 16:21, World Messianic Bible. The overarching issue present in this narrative of the Torah is how the Lord told Moses, behold, I will rain bread from the sky for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. Exodus 16:4, World Messianic Bible. Not all in the population of Israel would pay attention to Moses' direction in collecting the manna. Exodus 16, 19 and 20, 28. Frequently among examiners, this scene is associated with the later word of Deuteronomy 8:3. He humbled you, allowed you to be hungry, and fed you with manna, which you didn't know, neither did your fathers know, that he might teach you that man does not live by bread only, but man lives by every word that proceeds out of the Lord's mouth. World Messianic Bible. Likewise, to be considered should be the Messiah's own declarations. Most certainly, I tell you, it wasn't Moses who gave you the bread out of heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread out of heaven. I am the bread which came down out of heaven. John 6, 32, 41, World Messianic Bible. Collecting the manna was to be a daily part of Israel's routine in their desert sojourn. Yet, for the sixth day of the week, with the Sabbath to follow, it is stated how twice as much manna was to be collected. Exodus 16:22. What is important about Moses' direction to the Israelites does not just concern what it communicates to readers about pre-Sabbath preparation activities, but also how within the narrative of the Torah, Shabbat has just been mentioned prior to the formal delivery of the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. With the exception of the divine rest of Genesis 2, 1 through 3, there has been no mention of a formal Sabbath. In evaluating the significance of the Sabbath for the people of God today, what does the Sabbath appearing in this scene communicate? A Jewish commentator like Nahum M. Sarna generally concludes, quote, divine abstention from creativity on the seventh day is the climax of the biblical cosmology, as recounted in Genesis 2, 1 through 3. For this, the Hebrew stem, shin, bait, Tav is used in its verbal form, with God as the subject. Now, for the first time, the noun Shabbat occurs to designate the fixed institution that recurs with cyclic regularity. Unquote. Noting Exodus 16, 4 and 5, 26 to 30, Messianic Jewish writer Jeffrey Enoch Feinberg inquires in his Walk Exodus resource, quote, the Decalogue commands that Israel kept Shabbat holy, but Israel hasn't reached Sinai and the commandments have not yet been given, Exodus 20, 8 through 11. Explain why God is teaching Shabbat rest, unquote. Indeed, how are readers and examiners to account for the presence of the seventh-day Sabbath in Exodus 16, 22 to 30? Now we're going to be getting into a verse-by-verse analysis of the passage. Exodus 16, 22a. On the sixth day of the week, with the seventh to follow, the Israelites gathered a double portion of bread, 2 omers for each. Exodus 16, 22a, Robert Alter's version, as a measurement. And omer is defined by the Holiday Lexicon to be a measure of grain, approximately 2 liters or quarts. The Art Scroll Chumash notes it to be the volume of 43.2 average size eggs, with the Message actually having 4 quarts. A double portion was to be collected on the 6th day of the week, so there would be sufficient food for the Sabbath, which notably would not spoil, Exodus 16:24, unlike other days of the week. Walter Brueggemann actually describes this in terms of a contradiction, how what was prohibited for previous days was permitted for the Sabbath. Quote, a special practice is permitted on the 6th day in order to provide food for the Sabbath day, which follows, verses 22 to 26. What is permitted for the sake of the Sabbath directly contradicts what is prohibited for all the other days. What cannot be carried over from one day to the next is now carried over to the day of Sabbath. The Sabbath authorizes storing up bread because when designed for Sabbath, the extra bread does not reflect either anxiety or greed, unquote. The Jewish tradition of having 2 loaves of bread present at the Kiddush is based on the Exodus 16:22 instruction of ancient Israel collecting a double portion of manna for the 6th and 7th days. Talmud Barakot 39b, Shabbat 117b. Exodus 16:22b to 24. Within the record of the Israelites having gathered a double portion of manna on the 6th day, it is detailed. When all the chieftains of the community came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a day of rest, a holy Sabbath of the Lord. Bake what you would bake and boil what you would boil, and all that is left put aside to be kept until morning. Exodus 16:22b and 23, New Jewish Publication Society version. Unlike previous days of the week, on the 6th day, with the 7th day or Sabbath to follow, that which was left over from the 6th day could be stored. Further instruction regarding the preparation of the manna is given in Numbers 11:8. Moses directed the Israelite leaders, Shabbaton, Shabbat Kodesh, LaAdonai Machar. Tomorrow is a Sabbath / ceasing, a Sabbath of holiness for Adonai. Everett Fox's version. 2 terms actually appear to describe this weekly occurrence. Shabbaton, Sabbath observance, Sabbatism, Brown Driver Briggs, which can also be employed in contexts involving high Sabbaths, Leviticus 16:31, 23:24, 32:39, as well as Shabbat, designating the 7th day of the week, or weekly Sabbath. As the Keter Crown Bible put it, Tomorrow is a day of total rest, a holy Sabbath of the Lord. The real issue, for sure, is not the stylistic variance of how one may render Shabbaton Shabbat in Exodus 16:23, but rather how the Sabbath is being discussed before the formal giving of the Ten Commandments. Is the Sabbath in this narrative somehow being projected back from the formal giving of the Ten Commandments by either Moses or his scribes in their writing of the Pentateuch? Or might readers be witnessing how with ancient Israel, now free from the Egyptians, that instructions which would be formally codified have already begun to circulate among the population of Israel, as the people began to establish themselves as a society? Exodus commentators have offered various thoughts on the presence of the Sabbath in Exodus 16:23. Representing a very general opinion is Walter C. Kaiser, who draws out the presence of the 7-day week in Genesis and notes a pre-Israelite origin for the Sabbath principle, at least. Quote, "The day of rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord, did not originate with the Sinaitic legislation. For even in 20 verses 8 through 11, it was founded in the ordinances of creation, Genesis 2, 2 and 3. Genesis 29:27 knows of a bridal week of 7 days in Jacob's time, though a heptad symbolic of 7 years. Many compare this ordinance to the Babylonian Sabbatu, but no one has been able to demonstrate that Israel borrowed her concept of the Sabbath from Babylon. The correspondences are just too weak." Unquote. In his Pentateuch and Haftorahs, J.H. Hertz mentions how the community of ancient Israel and their patriarchal ancestors must have carried with them the Genesis traditions of creation, and with them how God rested on the seventh day. Quote, "Seventh day must have been known to the people as a special day, distinct from the other days of the week. The children of the patriarchs had brought with them to Egypt the tradition that God had completed his work of creation in 6 days, and that he had sanctified the seventh day. At Mount Sinai, therefore, the children of Israel are bidden." Unquote. More liberal examiners of Exodus, adhering to the JEDP documentary hypothesis, will be inclined to think that the material about the Sabbath originated from the so-called J source or Yahwist, and with it the religious traditions of the southern kingdom. Even with some source-critical presuppositions, though, the observations of Brevard S. Childs, focusing more on the text in its final form, should not go overlooked. Quote, "One cannot seriously imagine that the Old Testament tradition derived all the Sabbath commandments from its relation to the giving of the manna. Rather, the existence of the Sabbath is assumed by the writer." Unquote. The scene of Exodus 16:22-30 asks the reader questions about both Sabbath origins as well as Sabbath preparation and observance. When the direction concerning the double portion of manna for the 6th and 7th days was followed, it is described. "They put it away until morning, as Moses had commanded. It did not stink, and there was no infestation in it." Exodus 16:24, Art Scroll Tanakh. The obedience of the people to God's instruction was surely honored, being manifest in his faithfulness to provide food for the population of Israel on a day when they were not permitted to collect manna. J.A. Meacher appropriately concludes, quote, "To gather enough for the next day was neither allowed nor possible," 19 and 20, and this arrangement was specifically a test of obedience. 4. But into this scheme, the Sabbath intruded with its prohibition of work, and this meant that there could be no gathering of manna. Again, there was a command to obey, 5, and the Lord who delights in an obedient people himself intervened to make obedience possible in this matter, 23 and 24. The Lord safeguards what he has appointed. Unquote. Exodus 16:25-27. having collected a double portion of manna for the 6th and 7th days. Moses gave explicit permission for the people to eat what was left over from the 6th day for the 7th day. Moses said, "Eat this food today, for today is a Sabbath dedicated to the Lord. There will be no food on the ground today." Exodus 16:25, New Living Translation. Terence E. Fretheim takes this to mean, quote, "Sabbath rest stands opposed to all oppressive systems, insisting on regularly timed days of rest for all, but providing for the needs of the day. Moses tells the people to enjoy a Sabbath meal." Verse 25. The Sabbath is a day of rest from work, not from enjoyment of what God provides. Unquote. Moses further enjoined, "Gather it 6 days, but the 7th day is the Shabbat. On that day there won't be any." Exodus 16:26, Complete Jewish Bible. Even with there being no manna available for the people to collect on Shabbat, this is not to symbolize that God had abandoned the provision of his people. On the contrary, God was providing his people with a special day of rest and refreshment when they could focus on him. Not all in the population of Israel heeded what Moses said, and they found that there was no manna available for them to collect on the Sabbath. On the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather bread, but they found nothing. Exodus 16:27, Common English Bible. Exodus 20:10 through 14 may refer to this incident. Exodus 16:28. That some people went out to collect manna on the Sabbath was not met well by God. Hashem said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to observe my commandments and my teachings?" Exodus 16:28, Art Scroll Tanakh. Mitzvotai v'Torotai appears in the Complete Jewish Bible as "my mitzvot and my teachings," the Tree of Life version as "my mitzvot and my Torah," and the Jerusalem Bible by Koren as "my commandments and my Torot." Not following God's direction in terms as something as simple as not searching for manna on the Sabbath day was apparently endemic of much larger issues of disobedience. Childs draws our attention to how while the Sabbath is to possess joy for those who remember it, there is also a restrictive element to it, testing the people to see how obedient they will be. Quote, "Christian commentators have traditionally stressed the joy of the early concept of the Sabbath, which is surely correct. But the restrictive side of the day set aside to God belongs to the same tradition and cannot be dismissed. Not all the people were enjoying the Sabbath. Some were out hunting for manna." Once again, the theme of God's testing the obedience of the people recurs. God gives them a double portion of bread, but he demands a different way of life. Unquote. Recognizing God's inquiry about the Israelites not wanting to obey him, readers of the Torah see a frequent pattern witnessed throughout their desert sojourn. Not to be dismissed is how the focus, now being on Israel in the book of Exodus, is a demonstrable shift away from the focus having been on Pharaoh and the Egyptians. Peter Enns observes, quote, "The reference to God's commands for Israel comes up quite suddenly. The focus of previous chapters has been on Pharaoh's obedience to God's commands, not Israel's. But God has won the battle against Pharaoh. The Israelites are his people now, and he wastes little time reminding them of that fact. Lack of obedience will have dire consequences." Unquote. Exodus 16:29. Two key statements are enjoined in Exodus 16:29. "Mark that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore he gives you 2 days food on the 6th day. Let everyone remain where he is. Let no one leave his place on the 7th day." New Jewish Publication Society version. The Sabbath has been given by God. The Sabbath is a time when there are to be some restrictions on movement. That the Sabbath is a special gift of God, but also a time when people observing it must trust him, is observable from Re'u ki Adonai natan lechem ha-Shabbat. The Lord is the one who has given his people the Sabbath. The Sabbath comes from him. And so for the Israelites to transgress his direction, not to go out and collect manna, which was not going to be available for them, they did not consciously realize how God would be required to provide for them on Shabbat. Bringing together some key components of the Sabbath being given by God and God's own rest is Jeffrey H. Tegay in the Jewish Study Bible, who indicates, quote, since God observes the Sabbath, he will not provide manna on the seventh day, but will provide a double portion on the sixth day, and Israel will observe the Sabbath as well. The Sabbath, having been created in Genesis chapter 2, is first revealed to Israel here. The statement, Adonai has given you the Shabbat, complete Jewish Bible, does once again, like Hertz in Exodus 16:23 preceding, raise the question of why the Sabbath is being observed by the community of Israel when it had yet to be formally given. R. Alan Cole actually states in his commentary on Exodus 16:29, quote, on the basis of this and the breach of the Sabbath reported, some suggest that the Israelites had not kept the Sabbath while in Egypt, but that it was by way of being a novel observance. Perhaps their condition as slaves would account for this failure to observe it, even if some such custom had been known in embryo at least to their patriarchal ancestors, unquote. While an interpreter cannot be dogmatic about anything, a pre-Ten Commandments sabbatical rest observed by the pre-Mosaic Israelites and pre-Israelite God followers should not be dismissed. The second important assertion of Exodus 16:29, Shevu ish taktav al yetzei ish me mechomo beyom hashevi'i. Stay, each place of him, not he may go out, anyone from place of him on the day the seventh, from the Kohlenberger Interlinear. This was taken in later rabbinical examination as prohibiting one from walking more than 2,000 cubits on Shabbat, often in conjunction with Numbers 35:5 and Joshua 3:4, even with discussions taking place regarding how far one can travel on Shabbat up until the first century, Acts 1:12, and even modern times. Hertz is still correct in informing, quote, traveling interrupts the rest of both man and beast and was therefore to be avoided on the Sabbath day, unquote, from Pentateuch and Haftorahs. Exodus 16:30. The verb shavat is employed in Exodus 16:30. The people rested, the verb shavat, on the seventh day. Art Scroll Tanakh. Although lexically it would be entirely legitimate to also render Exodus 16:30 with, so the people remained inactive on the seventh day. New Jewish Publication Society version, or, and the people ceased from work on the seventh day. Robert Alter. The Yishbetu Ha'am is actually rendered by the Septuagint with Kai Esabatisin Ha Laos. And the people kept Sabbath, Brenton or the Lexham English Septuagint, or the people sabbatized, New English translation of the Septuagint. A pre-Ten Commandments Sabbath observance, Exodus 20 verses 1 through 17, 34 1 through 5, was present within the society of Israel. As Brueggemann observes, Sabbath observance was important for the people to break away from their Egyptian-influenced patterns of being. Quote, Sabbath is yet another opportunity to depart economically and psychologically from Egyptian modes of social reality. The alternative in this narrative is a world of glad dependence and utter fidelity, devoid of all anxiety and threat. The conclusion of the narrative, so the people rested on the seventh day, verse 30, is an affirmation that at least for this narrative, Egyptian patterns of existence have been nullified. Unquote. And we'll conclude with Exodus 16:21 through 30 application. For various readers of Exodus 16:21 through 30, the presence of and the reasons for a pre-Ten Commandments Sabbath may not be totally answered. It may be an indication of how a regular sabbatical, or proto-Sabbath if you like, was kept by various pre-Mosaic Israelites and pre-Israelite God followers. Certainly by the time when the Israelites were free from Egyptian servitude, principles and patterns which would help to establish them as a society were already being directed by leaders like Moses, which would have included the weekly Sabbath, recognizing God's daily provision for Israel via the manna to be collected each morning, presented an excellent educational opportunity for teaching the people how their God would provide for them on his Shabbat. Each of us, in our own remembrance of the weekly Sabbath or Shabbat today, can take some important cues from Exodus 16:22 to 30. We might not be collecting manna for 2 days, but we do need to conduct important preparations on the sixth day so that the seventh day is a time of cessation from laborious activities. We might have modern transportation, which can carry us more than 2,000 cubits, but modern Jewish tradition of the conservative movement only permits travel from one's home to one's synagogue and back for Shabbat. The Sabbath is to be a time when we not just remember God as creator, but as the creator who is faithful to provide for his own. And so as we conclude and as we consider, when we are today with, just all of these anxieties, all of these, what do we want to call it? All of these uncertainties. We have to remember God was faithful for ancient Israel in the wilderness. They were facing a lot of unknowns regarding their own future and what they were promised regarding this land they had never seen, but they had certainly heard about. Many of them doubtlessly considered it to be legend or myth at some point. Many of them were just happy to get out of Egypt. But then what? We're to take important lessons and cues from this as faithful Messiah followers today who know the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. We know their faithlessness. We know how, other than Joshua and Caleb, they all passed away. Nevertheless, we live in a time when we have the decisive resolution to all of these anxieties, to all of these worries and concerns. The completed work of Yeshua of Nazareth on the tree of sacrifice, his ascension into heaven, and his promise to return again and to bring all of us into his kingdom, and a type of rest, a type of nourishment, a type of provision which I don't think any of us have ever experienced. Maybe we've experienced it in part, but we've never experienced it. So I hope our discussion was helpful, useful, but above all, thought-provoking. And once again, this is from our, I did have to take some notes. This is from our Messianic Sabbath Helper publication, which is in the process of being updated for 2025, shooting for a release sometime in early November. We'll see. I'm on the second read through of this, just giving it a refresh and an update. All right, so this concludes our theology roundup. Now it's time for us to get into some news. Now, of course, right now, the past week, what has been taking place? Israel attacking Hamas headquarters in Qatar. We're likely going to see some responses to that from the Arab community in the coming days and weeks. Likewise, we've got Russian drones entering into Poland. NATO Article 4 has been invoked. What's going to happen there? The most significant event, which I think shocked all of us, was the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk. They did apparently catch the perpetrator, so we're going to get into that in a moment. With that issue, we've got three main things to be considering. Right now, most of us are in some kind of a condolence or mourning phase. He's not going to have his funeral until next week. President Trump did announce he's going to be given the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously. The second phase of this is, of course, the investigation into Charlie Kirk's death, the motives, who did it, etc. Got to give the legal process its due. But then number three, and this is what we're going to be definitely all have to sort through in the coming weeks, months, maybe even years ahead, will be the social ramifications of this. What does this indicate for freedom of speech? What does this indicate for safety on college campuses and other places of public interaction? I would have to say the impression I am getting, and though I reserve the right to change my opinion, the impression I am getting regarding Charlie Kirk's death that this could have the same kind of demonstrable impact on Generation Z, free speech, the conservative movement, as the Martin Luther King assassination did on the civil rights movement. That's what I am expecting. Of course, we will wait and see. But this is a time. This is a time for us to speak out boldly with our positions. I think America, Western civilization, has got one last chance to pull it out for a generation, and we don't want to blow this. But we will, of course, have to wait and see. Don't be intimidated. Speak out the truth. But all of us need to be very smart about our surroundings. We need to be very careful that we are protected. Of course, we have access to, as believers, legions of angels, infinite forces of light. Why do we not pray every day? Lord, we need your protection. So there are going to be a lot of people, of course, are sorting through this. Now, all the news stories I'm about to go through, these will be listed later today when this episode is archived at messianicapologetics.net. And yes, forgot to say this, we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news roundup is time sensitive. All right, let me switch windows and all right, there we go. Okay, we don't have, not all the stories are about Charlie Kirk's death. Here we have from Open Source Intel Defender, September the 11th. This is yesterday. The Civil Aviation Agency of Latvia has announced a closure of its airspace along the border with Russia, with the closure zone stretching 456 kilometers in length, 50 kilometers in depth, and up to an altitude of 19,500 feet, to be enforced by the NATO Baltic Air Policing Mission and the Latvian National Armed Forces. Okay, so yes, this is doubtlessly in response to Russian drones landing in Poland. NATO is going to enforce closure of Latvian airspace. And what is going to happen with the Russia-Ukraine situation? Is it going to now expand itself into Eastern Europe, the Baltic states, some of these areas which were formerly a part of the Soviet Union and or the Warsaw Pact? Yeah, this is very concerning. So we'll just, of course, continue to monitor. We know that these are the kinds of things which can change on a whim, but they are doubtlessly concerning. Okay, some of you all know this already. This is the pre-order page from Amazon.com, but Charlie Kirk was apparently a Sabbatarian. Yes, there are questions about his religious beliefs. His wife is Roman Catholic. He's got Roman Catholic family. But he observed a seventh-day Sabbath. And this book, entitled Stop in the Name of God, Why Honoring the Sabbath Will Transform Your Life, you can pre-order it, $29.99, supposed to be released on December the 9th. And Stop in the Name of God, Why Honoring the Sabbath Will Transform Your Life will help you discover how observing the Sabbath isn't a rejection of modern life, but a rebellion against busyness and a pathway to genuine connection, peace, and presence. Packed with practical insights and spiritual wisdom, Charlie Kirk demonstrates how honoring the Sabbath restores balance, reduces anxiety, and nourishes your soul. It's not just a day of rest, it's a lifetime to reclaiming what truly matters. So yes, apparently on Shabbat, the seventh day, he didn't do a Sunday Sabbath of many of my ancestors, at least. He unplugged from the world, unplugged from electronics, focused on God, family, what really mattered, got physically rejuvenated. And I have noticed on some of the Messianic Jewish forums I participate in or just kind of watch and monitor that this is one of the first things people said about Charlie Kirk. He was a Sabbatarian, and there's this book which came out. And what was important to note about particularly some of the Messianic Jewish leaders, yes, more on the MJAA, IMCS side, none of them came to the conclusion that Charlie Kirk keeping the Sabbath is infringing on my Jewish identity. No, they looked at this as a very good thing because Charlie Kirk was also a steadfast friend and supporter of Israel, the Jewish people, the Zionist dream of a Jewish homeland in the Middle East. He loved Israel, he loved the Jewish people, and he benefited from an institution like the Sabbath. There are a lot of Messianic Jewish leaders out there. They do not consider non-Jews resting on Shabbat to be somehow infringing on their identity. There are some out there who do, but they generally have looked at this Charlie Kirk book, which is still yet to be released, as a positive thing and encourage people to buy it as a way to honor him and his legacy. Okay. All right, so I have to open a screen, which I did not open. Sorry about this. But here is a post from, here's a story from the New York Post about Charlie Kirk. This is from their Instagram channel. Okay, here we are. This is from yesterday, September the 11th. Charlie Kirk was remembered as America's greatest martyr, who was no stranger to threats, but sacrificed his own safety to reach as many young people as he possibly could. The organization he co-founded said in a touching tribute, "Every one of us at Turning Point USA is crushed and devastated by the hateful murder of our founder and guiding light, Charlie Kirk," the group said in a statement. Okay, and I forgot to put, there we go. Okay. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, there are going to be a lot of people who are sorting through the legacy and impact of Charlie Kirk. And one of the, I would say, most significant tributes I saw, and some of you all may have seen this circulate on X, formerly Twitter, was a 4-minute condolence message, appeal to the need for all of us to exercise our right to speech, whether we're on the right or the left, but do so peaceably, without the threat of intimidation, without the threat of violence. It actually came from Senator Bernie Sanders, of all people, who said, Charlie Kirk and I hardly agreed on anything, but he honored Charlie Kirk's legacy. He condemned his death. He offered condolences to the family. And he stressed that in America, in a democracy where we have the right to free speech and public discourse enshrined in our Constitution, no one should feel intimidated. No one should feel threatened by any kind of violence. And so we want to remember these kinds of things. We don't often speak out when we should because we feel like we're going to get banned or we're going to have something hit us. we feel threatened, whatever the case might be. But for us as believers, we monitor these matters because the time is short. Look at what has taken place over the past 5.5 years since we entered into the 2020s, all the changes which have taken place. And there are many people who are not speaking out on the matters which are important. And, for myself, and I wouldn't say that I followed Charlie Kirk religiously. I didn't follow him closely. I followed him passively, and we engaged with a lot of his perspectives. Charlie Kirk, would have sat to the right of me on many different issues. I would have sat to the immediate right of center. He had some perspectives I would not have agreed with, but a lot of the approach I take to the issues is very much the same approach he did. So we're going to all be sorting through his legacy, regardless of how much or how little we agreed with him. And hopefully, we're going to see a lot more of a resurgence among Generation Z to think critically and not just accept what they see on social media. All right, our next story, and this is something which carries on from something we discussed yesterday. It's from My Charisma, of all places. Life on Mars? ? NASA makes incredible discovery. So here, of course, it talks about article in the New York Post. Talks about building rocks were found inside the Nerteva Vallis, which is a river valley on Mars. It is believed that this area contained water into the Jezero crater, which could have held signs of life. Talked about report further noted that the red clay mudstones collected contain carbon molecules, which are essential pieces for life. The stones also had green colored dots, which are being called poppy seeds and leopard spots. It is also plausible that these dots had iron phosphate and iron sulfide, which occur when microorganisms consume organic material. So, the lead study author of this investigation, Joel Horowitz, noted that the sample contains what we believe to be a potential biosignature origin. Microbes will eat the organic matter and react it with the mud, and the byproduct of that reaction is these minerals. Okay, so the conclusion of this My Charisma article is whether or not signs of life are ever confirmed on Mars, the gospel remains unshaken and central to our faith. The discoveries of science may expand our understanding of creation, but they should never shift our hope away from the Creator himself. Yeah, this isn't talking about some kind of ruins of an ancient civilization discovered on Mars. You're not talking about fossilized trilobite type things on Mars. You're not talking about fossilized animal creatures on Mars. You're talking about microbes. And this, of course, can stimulate all kinds of interesting speculation, especially among those who are evolutionists, creationists, etc. But the question of what is on Mars is only going to increase because should the Lord tarry, within 2 decades, we're going to have people like Elon Musk insist that we have a permanent presence on the moon, a permanent presence on Mars. Of course, that's going to reveal not only new things about the moon, Mars, but the greater solar system and the greater universe. We could see an expansion of things like the periodic table and questions about how wide, how vast, how ancient is the universe. Is human civilization the only sentient civilization are going to be asked more and more frequently by religious people. And so we will just, of course, wait and see. Okay, so our next story, and this is from Visegrad 24, forwarding on a clip from President Trump. Trump speaks about the Russian suicide drone swarms that violated Poland's airspace. This is from yesterday afternoon. It could have been a mistake, but regardless, I'm not happy about anything having to do with that whole situation. Yeah, that's a pretty fair assessment. And this is something with which, in spite of the domestic tensions and domestic anxieties we have, we're just going to have to wait and see what comes of Russia, Ukraine, and whether that conflict is going to start infringing on Eastern Europe. All right, from open source intel yesterday afternoon, forwarded on from Fox News, President Trump, we have a radical left group of lunatics out there, just absolute lunatics, and we're going to get that problem solved. So this is, of course, the president having to sort through the outcome of some of the initial responses to Charlie Kirk's assassination, what's going to happen on the domestic home front, because even with, and we're going to get into this in a moment, even with the apparent perpetrator captured, how do we prevent these kinds of things in our society from happening? Everyone is having to sort through this, right, left, center, it doesn't matter. All right, here's a very concerning story. Some of you probably aware of it. It's forwarded on by Eyal Yacobi. This is from yesterday afternoon, September the 11th. Breaking: Canadian Foreign Minister Anita Adnan says recognizing a Palestinian state is the priority, and Canada is reevaluating its ties with Israel. Now, Canada saying that they might be evaluating or reevaluating their ties with Israel. That doesn't mean termination of diplomatic relations, but it might mean, terminating various cooperation programs at first. But yeah, this is Canada we're talking about, our neighbor to the north. I'm immediately reminded how there is a very large and significant Messianic Jewish community in Canada. The current president of the MJAA, Jeff Foreman, City of David, Toronto, although those of you who met him know he's a dual citizen. He's from Philadelphia originally. But yeah, there's a large Messianic community in Canada. And this is something which I know they have got to be absolutely distraught over. All right, so here's a post which came across my Instagram feed from Rabbi Raps. You can watch this in greater detail, but here he says, he's a Chabad rabbi. As a rabbi, I don't talk politics, but when someone is murdered, we must speak. His perspective: I didn't agree with many of Charlie Kirk's views, but I respected his commitment to dialogue. He argued passionately, yet allowed others to speak. That openness is a deeply Jewish value. Our Talmud itself is filled with debates where every voice was preserved because conversation is sacred. Charlie was a strong advocate for Israel and the Jewish people. His murder is a heinous, senseless act we must all condemn. And indeed, one of the things we need to be challenged with or reminded with from time to time, that openness, that willing to have questions, that willingness to discuss inconvenient and uncomfortable things, as is seen in the record of a body of literature like the Talmud. How much of that do we actually see within the Messianic Jewish sphere of influence? Because that ability to have open speech, open questions, open dialogue, we're not going to be able to have that forever in our society. We just won't. And so in this time period, as we wait for the Messiah's return, we need to be able to take advantage of this season of openness, the season of being able to operate in a society, especially in the United States, which values and is enshrined freedom of religion and freedom of speech. Very important right we have. Not as many people appreciate it as they should. All right, from Visegrad 24, this is from today, September the 12th, 5:25 a.m. Poland's NATO allies to send reinforcement to Poland after Russia's drone swarm attack against Poland. France will send fighter jets. The UK will send fighter jets. Netherlands sends 2 Patriot batteries. Czechia sends 3 Mi-17 helicopters and 1,000 troops. Okay, now this is, of course, something we should be very concerned about. We know these are the kinds of things which are intended to get the Russian government, get potential aggressors to rethink what they are doing. But yeah, this is not good. So when I say pray for peace, Russia and Ukraine, that this conflict can stop, this is a serious matter. Okay, this is from earlier today, this morning, from Fox News. The president in New York City appearing 7:26 a.m. Open source intel defender forwarded this on. U.S. President Donald J. Trump announces that a suspect is in custody in relation to the shooting of Charlie Kirk, with reports indicating that a minister who is also in law enforcement spoke with the suspect's father, who convinced his son to turn himself into the police early on Friday. Okay, now moving on from Instagram. This came out later from the New York Post. Breaking: President Trump announced early Friday that a suspect for Charlie Kirk's assassination was turned in by his father, with law enforcement sources telling the Post it is a 22-year-old Utah local, Tyler Robinson. I think with a high degree of certainty we have him, Trump told Fox and Friends during a live interview at the cable giant's Manhattan studio, saying he heard just minutes before his 8 a.m. interview. Okay, and of course, there are going to be a lot of questions regarding who this fellow Tyler Robinson was. 22 years old, local Utah native. What motivated him to want to murder someone like Charlie Kirk? From open source intel, and this is a clip, 9:22 a.m. today, FBI Director Kash Patel: in 33 hours, we have made historic progress for Charlie. And it's a 22-second clip. Now, here we have from the New York Post just 2 hours ago, according to the Instagram feed here, Charlie Kirk's alleged assassin, Tyler Robinson, was full of hate in the days before the shooting, according to a family friend. As authorities revealed, the 22-year-old had confessed to the assassination and had been turned in by a relative. And the headline is actually Tyler Robinson full of hate before Charlie Kirk shooting, says family friends, while "Hey fascist, catch" found written on bullets. Okay, so we do have to let the authorities continue with their investigation. It is doubtless that there will be more information coming out in the coming days and months. But the main issue we have to be focused on is, what are some of the long-term social ramifications going to be regarding this? Okay, and then our final story, and this is passed on from open source intel defender. I got this right as we were getting set up for today. The United Nations has voted 142 to 10 in favor of endorsing the New York Declaration, which calls for the establishment of a state of Palestine, with the few countries who voted against the measure including Argentina, Hungary, Israel, and the United States. So, what are we going to see in the coming weeks as different world leaders go to the UN General Assembly? They speak before the world. And what are we going to see take place regarding the announced intention of different Western countries to acknowledge an independent state of Palestine? We have a lot to be thinking about as today's Messianic community with the fall high holidays, because while rapture speculation, September the 23rd, all that is definitely on the increase, that will come and go. And while we have taken some giant leaps forward toward the second coming, I don't want to be presumptuous, over the past several years, we are going to reach some kind of a point event regarding this Israel, Gaza, Palestine, Middle East situation. And indeed, the Lord is definitely using events to stir the attention of his people. And the next few years are going to be some, if we haven't already seen enough dramatic changes, There are going to be even more dramatic changes coming. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support toward all of our ministry efforts. I encourage you to check out my website, messianicapologetics.net. There you can access a wide number of free articles, frequently asked questions entries. There's a list of Outreach Israel News back issues, and you can look at some of our other adventures over the years. We'll see you again on Monday with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you. Shabbat Shalom, and take care.